Yes.
Okay, so Tommy's just obviously asked me to come along and have do a little bit around the recruitment and retention strategy and how that's kind of progressing, what the current situation is, and what's sort of new on the horizon or changing on the agenda. I've sort of looked at this a little bit through the ECF lens as well, simply because that's kind of one of the new big strategies that have come into play, and it's important to perhaps have a think about how that's affecting or potentially going to affect recruitment and retention in teaching in the future. So the first thing I just want you to think about is staff turnover. Okay, so obviously that's something as school leaders that you will be dealing with on a daily basis, and it might be that you're losing fewer staff this year or more staff this year than usual. Perhaps think about, in terms of percentages, what that is in your setting. Do you know of any individuals that are leaving the profession completely at any point this year? And then the other thing that you perhaps be more acutely aware of is how easy or hard is it been to replace them. So bear those kind of things in mind, because that's going to set the background for the sorts of things we might be thinking about. The data nationally tells us that more percentage-wise, schools on average are losing slightly more staff this year than the usual. The 2 COVID years are kind of taken out of the picture a little bit. So if we think about the pre-COVID years, COVID gave a sort of a false impression, really, because nobody was really moving on. Teacher mobility was very, very limited during the COVID years, because who wants to move in the middle of a pandemic? Even people that were set to retire thought, okay, I'm just going to hang on another year and see how this pans out, before making any really massive life-changing decisions. So I think we've got a bit of a rebound on that now, so that everybody's kind of like, now is my chance. COVID's gone-ish, so now is my chance to come back and change my plans or do what I want to. From an AB point of view, from the Teaching School Hub, anecdotally, we know that there are a handful of early career teachers who are leaving the profession completely after a year, and there are others we are aware of as well that are leaving teaching entirely. There will be some data on that in the fullness of time. We know it's being hard to replace people this year, harder than usual, perhaps because there are more than usual. But obviously, working with SCITT trainees, if you're thinking about subjects like maths and science, all our trainees were employed for September by February in those shortage subjects. So, I get emails and phone calls quite a lot from school leaders saying, have you got anybody who needs a job in this subject or this subject? And the answer was pretty much no. We only have a handful, well, probably just 1 or 2 trainees still looking for posts in some of those hard to gain subject areas. So there's quite a lot of vacancies out there. Our schools across our trust still have vacancies that they aren't able to fill at this point in time. So there's a big challenge there, and you may or may not feel that resonates with you as well. So Jack Worth, who works for an FER, he's a really interesting person to follow, does a lot of work on recruitment and retention data. So he's looking at, this is the recruitment side of things now. Recruitment to ITT, you may have heard on the grapevine, has been quite challenging this year, particularly in the secondary sector. And you can see from that quote there from Jack that teacher supply challenges, having been kind of static for a while because of the pandemic, when teaching was seen as a nice, safe profession that was, something very, very safe in a difficult time, has now bounced back to, not bounced or reduced back to where it was pre-COVID. So those recruitment challenges are re-emerging, and Jack is saying that policy action is going to be needed to look at how we might tackle that. And in fact, I follow Jack on Twitter, and he put something on yesterday that said, and this was quite shocking, that on current data that they have for recruitment, we have recruited to ITT 19% of the physics teachers required for next year. 19%. So that's a big ouch. And there were quite a lot of other subjects mentioned. He goes on to say physics, obviously big challenges. Maths has recruited quite well this year, but there's loads and loads of jobs for maths teachers, so we need it. Chemistry, computing, design, tech, MFL, always been a challenge to recruit to and to fill posts. But we're also seeing this year that in subjects which have been traditionally well popular amongst ITT, there are still challenges there. So subjects that have been fairly easy to recruit to, geography, biology, English, RE, are proving challenging as well. Every year we are, as you might know, we are capped on the number of trainees we can recruit and train for PE, because there are more people wanting to train for PE than there are posts available. They've taken the cap off of PE training this year. So if they've done that, things have to be quite tough in the old teacher ITT recruitment. So is this happening, we ask ourselves? Is it just because nobody wants to be a teacher? Hopefully not, because we all know it's a great profession. But, you know, data tells us that pay and working hours are an issue. We've got a resurgent labour market for the time being. How long that lasts, who knows? And teachers that do kind of fall by the wayside, or people that don't want to go into teaching or continue teaching, always still cite workload and their perceptions of that as one of those reasons for not going into or not staying in the profession. So it's a bit doom and gloomy, I'm afraid, that. But hopefully there are some light at the end of the tunnel. Retention, again, back to that old chestnuts, those rates were significantly improved during the pandemic. As we said, people didn't want to move on during uncertain times, but that has, you know, changed back to pre-pandemic levels now. And on average, 15% of ECTs leave within 1 year and 25% within 3 years, which is 1 in 4, which is massive if you think about the amount of money that goes into training these people and the amount of skills that they acquire, but they're not in it for the long haul. So what can we do to improve this situation somewhat? Well, the early career framework obviously was a part of that, the package to support ECTs, the 2-year package, the reduced timetable, the mentor time, the protected time, the high quality training programs, including, you know, the face-to-face and the self-study, etc. So you'll probably have some opinions about how effective this is being in your school, whether it's having the desired effects to support those ECTs more and therefore keep them in the profession for a greater time, or not. We don't have data on that at the moment, but we will have.
Yeah, Caroline, from having, because obviously you're our ECF director as well as ITT, and I know you've been doing quite a lot of data dive into how it's landing with our ECTs and how they're feeling about this support package. Are there any sort of highlights from that I know it's anecdotal at this stage, but are there any highlights that we can share with schools around the impact it may be having and maybe where we could do a bit better?
Yeah, so I think I've kind of got I think I might have a slide sort of around that coming up, but generally well received. I think in school, the thing the ECTs value above all else on our sort of anecdotal data is the time with the mentors. So having that designated, delegated, protected time with the mentors and having a nice structured program to follow, I think they appreciate that. I think they found some of the self-study stuff useful. I think some of them have struggled to get into the good habits with that, but perhaps a little bit. I think they very much enjoyed the face-to-face time when they've been able to get together with other ECTs. That's all been really successful. But it is, you know, if you ask 90% of ECTs will tell you it's the time, the valuable time with their mentor in their context, in their setting, that has given them the most, I would say. So, you know, we have the early career framework. It gives us a framework about what great teaching looks like. And, you know, as school leaders, that content is really, really valuable. But obviously knowing what's in there and knowing what the implications for mentors and ECTs and having those structures and processes in place is, you know, it's down to schools as well, isn't it, of course, to make sure that that's really built on and emphasized as well. It's not just about his program, get on with it. It's about, here's a program that we're going to integrate into our school. It's a challenging thing, though, providing those ECTs with what they want and what they need. Those professional development programs are very detailed and extensive. My ECTs need to follow that program, but I also need my ECTs to do other induction activities as well within school. So how am I going to balance that and make sure they get what they need without overloading those people in school? Because, you know, the minute they start feeling overloaded and overworked or whatever, you know, that's when that whole retention question starts to settle. How can I make sure I have fidelity to the ECF and making sure I'm meeting the statutory guidance, as well as making sure it fits in with my school? There's no easy answer to that one, actually. It's just about making sure that you've integrated it as best you can into your school. The ECF professional development programs seem prescriptive. How can I make sure the ECTs get what they need when they need it? I think some of the programs are quite prescriptive, actually, depending on which one you're doing. But there is enough flexibility within that to make sure that their individual needs are responded to, their individual targets are met, and so on. And this is the big one that I think is a big challenge facing schools. I need mentors for year 1 and year 2, and we've got lots of ITT trainees. How can I build capacity for all of that? The answer is it's a challenge. I think planning ahead is probably one of the best things you can do, but also identifying those people that might move up. You know, you might have a year or 2 as an ITT mentor, and then you might move into being a year 1 ECT mentor, and then you might follow that through. So I think perhaps identifying those people in school that are ready for those steps, and I'm sure that's something that you're doing too. Oh yeah, this is the impact survey that I said that we did with the ECTs. So how has the ECT training helped you acquire new knowledge and skills? So 81 responded very positively to that. What extent have you been able to implement your learning in the classroom? So 86% responded very positively to that. And to what extent has your training helped you improve pupil outcomes? 85% responded very positively to that. So good, positive response to the training elements. You have to wonder those sort of 15-16% that didn't respond so positively. We have obviously looked at those responses, and it's usually around, I haven't had time to do this, I have got too many pressures on me to spend hours doing that. And a few little nibbles and twibbles about things like, I knew this already. Why did I have to do some training about something that I was already very familiar with from my ITT year? So by and large, very positive. So you'd like to think this is going to have the positive effect on retention that it was designed to do, but time will tell, I think. Lots of great practice across our schools, people really, sticking their necks out and really doing some innovative things to try and make sure their ECTs get the best deal that they can, because they really want to hang on to their staff. And, if one message you take away from me, we're warbling on today, is that when it's only going to get harder to recruit staff, it's not going to get easier. The pool of trainees to choose from is going to get smaller. The number of people perhaps changing careers or moving on isn't going to get any smaller anytime soon. So hang on to the staff that you've got. So everything that you can do to nurture, support, train, guide and coach those staff, please do it, because you want to hang on to them, and your ECTs in particular being your vulnerable group to leave in. The longer you stay in teaching, the longer you're more likely to stay. Once you've got past that 5-year point, the chances are you're in it for the long haul, but it's in that vulnerable point, in those first early years where the dropout rate is massive. So are there things that you can do to improve the ECT experience even more? Some group training sessions, perhaps, with some follow-up one-to-one coaching and target setting conversations, so that the ECTs get to work together more, and then but still have that individual coaching. Can you have more than one induction tutor if you've got a high number of ECTs, so they get that personalized approach, and the workload there is shared a little bit? Can you implement a sort of learning walk strategies so that perhaps ECTs can learn from each other? And are you using your Teaching School Hub or your appropriate body as much as you possibly can to get as much support and help, guidance from those as you possibly can? You know, our door is always open. It's obviously not been without its pitfalls and problems, and you know, you pray, don't you, that these aren't going to be the things that, if we don't see massive improvements in retention, these are the things you hope they don't cite as a reason. So, you know, we couldn't mentor our ECTs properly because we didn't have the capacity to do it, or we didn't have the right person, or the mentoring skills weren't there, therefore that person didn't get looked after and nurtured. Perhaps, you know, there were some issues around fidelity to the full program, so those ECTs not getting the exact deal that everybody else was getting. So has that been a factor? Having all my ECTs out at the regional and local events at the same time has been a real headache and a nightmare. Has that been a factor in the success of the programme? And also the additional requirements for the statutory reduction in timetable, etc., etc. You know, making sure that they get that, but then obviously that has a knock-on effect to school. So I'm going to be really, really interested to see what the next sort of bits of data tell us. So in a year's time, is the dropout rate from, you know, from ECTs going to be less than in pre-pandemic times? And if so, is that something that we can relate back to the success, relative success or not, of the early career framework? And for those people that are still leaving the profession, you know, have the reasons changed? Are they the same? You know, the last thing what you hope to hear is, oh, being an ECT was too hard because there was too much work to do, or there was too many pressures on me, etc., etc. So I believe it's changed for good. You know, the ECF has not been without its issues, not been without its difficulties to implement, but there is no doubt that the intention is to really affect that retention, and hopefully the knock-on effect of that will be increased better recruitment. But as I said before, you know, when you're thinking about this in your own context, recruitment and retention will continue to be a challenge for a while, I believe, and we don't know what the government will do to address that agenda. So what you can do is just try and hang on to your staff as best you can in the short term, and hopefully then these things won't be something that will be massive issues for you in school. Has anyone got any questions they want to ask about any of that? I just find the whole thing quite fascinating, looking at those trends and looking at the data. And, you know, like I said, recruitment to ITT is my core business, or some of my core business. So I do feel quite strongly about, you know, these things being really important. But I'm happy if anyone's got any questions or queries about that to expand. No, stunned silence. Excellent.
Thank you, Caroline, for sharing. And I think it will be very interesting to see the commitment going forward from the ECF and that coaching culture, that mentoring culture, instructional culture being embedded into schools, and as we go through and see if that's kind of, from my perspective, what I'm going to be talking about next is very much around thinking about that workforce development pathways, and making sure that we are thinking about the preparedness for each of our colleagues for their next steps. So definitely there's that induction as a promise in the commitment to the recruitment and retention agenda was very much about getting workloads sorted, entry routes into teaching being there, but ultimately, and I think that this language that's in the teacher recruitment and retention strategy around investing in and embedding in school cultures that create a sense of value through ongoing professional development, and that comes from the in-school mentoring and comes from the external, you know, national professional qualifications, which are all around culture, which is what I'm going to link into next. So yeah, it's hopefully a part of something that we can knit together and get through this next transitional period as we go forward. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing, and I hope my next section dovetails well into what you've been able to share with us. So thank you very much. Fab. So as I've talked about already, my section as Teaching School Hub Director is thinking about how do we take that message around data? How do we take the picture that's building around some of the challenges we know we're already starting to feel the crunch, and it's not just in our teaching staff, it's in our non-teaching staff. We're going to talk from a Teaching School Hub thread at the moment, but if colleagues are thinking that they'd like to talk about pathways for non-teaching staff, there might be a whole spotlight event around what we're doing to support our wider staffing structures, and how do we continue to recruit, train and retain our other support staff in the wider school community. So with this in mind, good start point, support for early career teachers, and that culture in schools is a big focus. And it comes also now, it's enshrined in the new white paper that has come out recently about there's an excellent teacher for every child. The language in the white paper comes a little bit further along from the commitment in the original teacher recruitment and retention policy paper. And it's very much about this idea that great teachers are not born, they are made. And therefore, if we want an excellent teacher for every child, so we want a teacher in front of the children. Excellent, we've recruited and retained the staff, and we've got enough staff in our schools. We also want to make sure that they are teaching in the best way possible. So and that's why it talks about this teacher development programs that they're investing in as being a real lever for change. So with that in mind, it talks about this access to world-class evidence-based training and PD, and going through to specialist routes through the MPQs as well. So we would like in this moment just to give you an opportunity to sort of think about your workforce development pathways from that early career teacher, that kind of emerging success that we're seeing, all the way through up to your leadership pipelines up here. So some of the threads that we would invite schools to think about is, have you got that sequential kind of progression mapping? Have you got the curriculum hubs involved, as well as the Teaching School Hub and other partners involved in that, so that when they're exiting their year 1 and 2 and they're going into this 3, 4 and 5, which statistically is the window in which we lose the most staff. After they get over the 5-year hump, they tend to stay with us, but unfortunately those trends of year 3, 4 and 5s, they are our vulnerable group. So the Teaching School Hub offer for next year, and the curriculum hub offer in our wider kind of landscape, our wider educational ecosystem, is very much focused on getting that part right. So we've got 2 offers around teaching excellence program for teachers who are needing to refine and embed really good practice, and coaching for impact. That's that if you've got a real strong practitioner that could lead into excellent leadership in the future, but not quite there at that budding middle leadership level. Maybe they would like that coaching for impact, that wider system connect with other excellent practitioners. And then from that, we have 3 courses all focused on very specific need in the system. In partnership with the Research School, we'll be doing the SEND in the mainstream offer, because we know that is a big need around this ambitious curriculum, but with a teaching and learning and a pedagogic practice that meets the need of SEND pupils. So how do we ensure an ambitious curriculum for all pupils, including our SEND, but also ensure that our pedagogy is also there to sufficiently scaffold and support all of our SEND pupils in the mainstream, and then the wider interventions and support and the scaffolds that we have that wrap around the whole class teaching as well. And then we've also got the Making a Difference to Disadvantage, which is for our pupil premium leaders, our CPD leads, those kinds of strands, particularly in a post-COVID supporting recovery framework, particularly with the new DfE requirements around the pupil premium menu starting from September. Now, on the other end of the aspect is talking about great teachers are made. Well, this is where your leadership pathways should be able to help support that culture shift within schools. So the Specialist MPQ suite is designed for not just exclusively middle leaders, it's for middle and senior leaders, depending on who is the most appropriate person. It could be somebody who's new in that post or somebody who's budding into that post. What's really exciting is we have 4 pathways in total now. So we've got leading literacy, so that's your reading, your writing, particularly nationally. Writing is down much lower than reading at the moment. So how do we make sure that we have a whole school approach that's coherent? And then on top of that, you've got the other 3 that have been this year: leading teaching, which is very much about curriculum and pedagogy; leading teacher development, which is very much about the culture and training of staff to ensure retention, and to ensure that they're the best that they possibly can be. So how do you ensure that those colleagues are being developed in the ways that adult learners are able to, and how do you affect that change in teacher practice? How do you change what's effectively behaviours in alignment of the best practice that we know from an evidence base? And the behaviour and culture one is definitely one that was a massive gap in the previous MPQs. We had lots of pastoral leads who'd be with us saying, I just don't fit into this MPQ, and the old MPQ ML and the MPQ SL, and now finally there's something bespoke. And what isn't as widely known is that pastoral leads who are non-teaching staff, they can go on any of these programs, but obviously often it's our pastoral leads who would really benefit from the leading behaviour and culture. So that's a little nod towards, okay, how are we growing development pathways for our non-teaching staff? Now, this is a great funded opportunity, and as I said, it is funded, so it is part of the current offer from the DfE on supporting schools. We know that it's funded at the moment. It is not a guarantee that it will be funded for a long while, but we can say that applications being submitted now are fully subject to scholarship funding, which is brilliant news. Then going into the leadership MPQ suite, we finally have not just an MPQH and an SL, a senior leadership course, but we also have an early years leadership course, which is for our colleagues in early year settings, including PBIs, private nursery settings, as well as maybe our infant schools that have very large nursery and reception class, and are doing a lot of that leadership work at the equivalent level of say a head teacher of how you manage and organise that. So yes, hopefully that's a really exciting opportunity. So definitely the little nudges down below are all about thinking about what are the incremental steps and pathway opportunities that we're providing our colleagues in our setting, and that culture that we're creating to ensure that everyone has opportunities, to ensure that we are able to retain all of our best staff and create the culture and the ways of working in our schools that allow us to come to work really happy, reducing workload, feeling supported, and being the best that they possibly can, that excellent teacher for every child. So there is the kind of picture, and hopefully it's giving you an idea of what the DfE offer on the table is for schools, and hopefully that's an interesting kind of thought-provoking framework to start to think about that. I'm going to leave in the slide deck some of the FAQs that we regularly get asked about the MPQs and the ECF. So they're ones that we get asked all the time, so we kind of just leave them in for schools. And it does lead into, I just wanted to make a couple of updates from the ECF. There is the ECF funding which is coming out in the summer term this year, so if you have a year 1 ECT, then you can expect your funding this year. It will come out in the summer, and there's a little summary of what that looks like there. If you do want to know a little bit more about the Golden Thread and the teacher development, workforce development pipeline, the DfE is doing, has done a live event, but that will be available as a webinar. So if you do want to hook into that, you'll be able to see it as a video after the event. Only a couple of bits I wanted to share just in case it's useful is if you are planning for next year, do remember that it's not 10% but 5% your year 2 ECT will require. If you're working with the hub, they won't require weekly mentor meetings but fortnightly mentor meetings, and definitely the quality of target setting, the quality of each of the checkpoints to make sure that we help keep our colleagues on track, that we don't get to the end of the year and realise there's a fundamental problem and we haven't put interventions in early. What I would say is DfE have asked us to comment that on based upon feedback, often the statutory requirement around ECT's observing practice and being observed has been a bit of a struggle due to A, staffing, and B, not being able to be in and out of each other's classrooms during the restrictions around COVID. So as a result, naturally that's been impacted. So we'd invite schools to think about that part of their statutory entitlement next year, so we can balance that out as we are living with COVID now. Last bit for me on ECF is literally, if you are kind of getting into this for the very, very first time, there is a really nice collection of information that is there on the DfE website, which has all of the guidance around ECT induction, ECF-based training, statutory guidance, policy papers. They've put it all in one neat collection for you. So hopefully that is super useful. And with the ECF, if you're onboarding ECTs this year, there are 3 videos that you can access, 3 videos that you can access that help you with the portal, and they've re-clarified their language. So that is my whistle stop tour end to the workforce development pipeline. I hope it's been of interest to see how some of these parts are all starting to click together, and that golden thread of evidence-based, high-quality training being provided, including the curriculum hubs from across the landscape, that we've got a lot that is there that is geared up to offer you. Which leads me very nicely, I hope, to Carl. Carl, are you with us?
I'm here, yeah.